back in the days, we used to say that, you know, you don't do a tour and come back without having a permanent secretary dismissed or a project manager arrested or a director dismissed and arrested. Those were the orders of the day.
Among freedom of movement, we don't have liberty. Then
Development is about continuity. And for every development plan in the Gambia, it is about what? Looking at interventions that are on the ground that need to continue. What other new interventions we need to initiate?
But when we started here, we did not see any fire. We did not inherit any fire. This was initiated and registered during 2018, 2019, during this current regime.
Any succeeding government would also have some interventions that it will inherit.
The National Development Plan 2018-2021, the NDP, is the blueprint that embodies the government's vision and priorities for national development.
National Development Plan bi plan la bi nga xamné ni pour plan yi réew mi la naka la ñoy def develop réew mi plan bi ni doomi réew bu nekk yang ci am wala.
If we look at the National Development Plan, it is a very robust development plan, and it has 8 strategic priority areas and 7 critical enablers. And if we look at these strategic priority areas, they range from issues relating to governance, economic management, infrastructure, human capital development, that's education and health, to women empowerment, reaping the demographic dividend, that is how do we invest in our young people, our youth, issues relating to the environment, infrastructure, roads, energy, ICT, etc.
National Development Plan. Sai, wal fana mu fenneti me alonko banko ka ye fere lando la ci. O fere lando o ceta munati wala mu nyinte mol balu nyaasi sone anu nyame.
I would like to commend the government also for the good work and the progress that has been done. A lot of it is behind the scenes. Most people don't want to read in Gambia or even see positive things. They would rather always have doom and gloom stories. But progress is being made. Progress can be slow sometimes, but slow progress is better than standing in the same place.
On behalf of the government of the Gambia and the people of the Gambia, I express heartfelt appreciation of their laudable contribution to the achievement of this component of the National Development Plan.
The National Development Plan NDP TV series airing every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. on GRTS. For sponsorship, please call 383-3544, 232-5299, 736-2861, 996-8898.
Welcome to another edition of the OGI Hour here on the GRTS TV. My name is Fatuli Kamuluji, your presenter for this program. It's again a pleasure to bring you another edition. And today on the show, we're looking at the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare. Joining us in the studio to discuss issues surrounding this ministry and where we're headed now onwards is the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, Madam Rahibite Dabo. And as well, she's been joined in the studio by her DPS, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, who is Mr. Kajali Sanko. Together, they will help us expand the conversation here. But don't forget, we are on social media, on Facebook at GRTS TV, on Instagram and Twitter at GRTS TV Official. We're also streaming live on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe. When we come back from the break, my guests will help expand the conversation. Do stay. Welcome back. This is the OGI Hour coming to you from GRTS TV. My name is Fatih Kamlushi, and like I said, my guests today are the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare, Madam Rohi Bitey Dabo, and with her here in the studio is the Deputy Permanent Secretary at that ministry, who is Kajali Sonko. I mean, Pierce, it's great having you on the OGI Hour. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Fat. We're also glad to be here. I think this is a very important program for everybody. So we are more than grateful to be here as a ministry to talk about what we do, what is expected of us, and then so that the public can know exactly what we are out here to do.
Interesting. Very well. And we're glad to have you here. DPS, of course, you're also welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Fatu, for having us here. I think it's very important that we have this touch base with the general public to know, as a new ministry, what we are doing and taking stock of where we started and where we're heading to.
Very much important. And as a new ministry, Pierce, that in fact, you know, is going to be what will open this conversation with, because this ministry, which was referred to as the Ministry of Women's Affairs, or the Minister of Women Affairs, was also the Vice President of the country. Now we have the separation, where we have this ministry standing on its own, way different from the office of the Vice President. What difference does this separation, of course, bring about? And we're also aware of the fact that this same ministry will soon be referred to as the Minister or the Ministry for Gender and Social Welfare.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum to all viewers. Good afternoon. As Fatu has just highlighted, we used to have the Ministry of Women Affairs under the Office of the Vice President, and the Department of Social Welfare was under the Ministry of Health. But with the establishment of the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare in 2019, January 2019, it was deemed necessary to have the Department of Social Welfare, because when you have children on the social welfare and you have the vulnerable groups on the social welfare, then you cannot separate women from children, you cannot separate women from people with disabilities, you cannot separate women from the elderly or any other vulnerable group. That is why it was important to bring all these units together and have the ministry as one.
Interesting. So what difference does this separation bring about in the near future as well? What dividends will it yield?
You mean the bringing together of
the
DSW
having
and
it,
the ministry?
of course, on its, you know, a ministry of its own, looking at all these different facets.
Yes, as the ministry is mandated to look into protecting, you know, vulnerable groups, including women and children, people with disability, the elderly, and then, you know, protecting their rights, empowering them. So it's important to have DSW, which looks into more of the vulnerable groups, and then have the Ministry of Women, under which we also have the Ministry of the Department, the Women's Bureau. Okay. Now, the Women's Bureau, it's established by an act. So we are trying to see if we are working with National Assembly and Ministry of Justice to make sure that, you know, the Women's Act is amended so that the Women's Bureau will become a Directorate of Women, of Gender. Because the ministry's name, we got approval from Cabinet that it could be changed to Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Welfare, because that's the best practice across the world.
Is that welcomed at the ministry? Do you welcome this new development?
Of course we do. Gender, it's more general. There's some men that are also underprivileged. Absolutely. So it's important to consider them as well. So if you say a Ministry of Women, some men would think that they don't have anything to do with the ministry. But then, you know, naming it gender would at least give them the impression and the information that they're part of the ministry, and their needs are also considered because they fall under the other vulnerable groups, such as, you know, people with disability. The reason why we are focusing more on women is because the women are the underprivileged.
Of course.
Yes. But then bringing again, to your question, having the Ministry of Women together with DSW as an institution under it, it's a great idea because we also have the department, the Directorate for Children Affairs, and then we are planning on having a Directorate for Planning, Policy, Programs, Projects, you know, and then research. Because looking at our portfolio, we definitely have to work very hard to ensure that we reach out to the people that we are serving. You remember, we are civil servants, so we're here to serve the people. Serving the people means putting into consideration what their needs are, what their aspirations are, and then trying to do our best to make sure that their expectations are met.
Interesting. And then DPS, let me just shift to you because definitely, like she mentioned, this is a new ministry, which is more like a year old or so.
Yes.
And then here we are, of course, such an arduous task you have, quite a lot under your watch. But what did it have to take to set up such a ministry?
I mean, thank you very much. I would like also to join the PS to, you know, thank the viewers. What is significant here is we actually look at the demographic principles.
Right.
Realizing the fact that children's need and women's need are interchangeable. I mean, where you were dealing with women, of course you have to deal with their children. And of course, as he said, we have to look at international best practices to be able to, you know, match ourselves to the commitments that we've made in terms of ratification of the CEDAW protocol and the CRC. The issue of having this ministry have been, you know, coming on board for quite a long time. But when, I mean, when the Third Republic came into being, they take it as a very serious consideration of establishing a separate ministry that will look at this demographic principle, particularly when you look at the population. Almost 59% of the population are women.
Right.
And if you count in children, you count in, I mean, persons with disability, it becomes almost 92% of the population that we are serving. So setting up the ministry as we took off with a very tangible effort, because we had to, you know, take a bold step in terms of looking at the existing situation. We conducted an institutional assessment that looks at the SWOT analysis, what are the weaknesses, the strength in terms of our partnership, both internal and external. And we took that report as a benchmark to develop a strategy that will, you know, give us the pathway in terms of aligning internal strength, the partners that we're working with, and how do we harmonize gender equality, women empowerment, child protection, social protection, and a host of cross-cutting issues.
So this strategy, has it been finalized already?
The strategy has been finalized. It has been endorsed by Cabinet.
What are the key main focus in this strategic document?
As I just said, the main focus in this strategic document is to ensure that we provide the services that are needed by the general population, taking into consideration social protection needs, health needs, education needs, issues relating to child protection, I mean gender equality and women economic empowerment, as it was aligned with the National Development Plan. Because this is the benchmark that we started to look at before even having the idea of establishing this 3 directorates that the PS has mentioned.
Yes. And we will in fact dissect these areas because it's important that we look at them one after the other, if not exhaust all as it is. But PS, would you say you're in line with your strategy at this point in time?
Of course, yes, we can say that. The strategic plan is just to give us a strategic direction as a ministry. And basically, women issues are cross-cutting, children issues are cross-cutting. Most of these vulnerable groups, their issues are cross-cutting.
Right.
So even common sense can guide our activities, our programs, our strategies. But then it's always good to have a document as a reference point for beginners or people who have no clue of how ministries of women, children, and social welfare works in different areas.
Very well.
So the strategic plan, as my DPS technical has highlighted, is already developed. We have gotten approval from the cabinet of the Gambia. Now we are working on having a consultation meeting, stakeholder consultation meeting, which is very important. The validation was done, including all stakeholders. So the purpose of the stakeholder consultation meeting, which we are going to have next week, inshallah, everything being equal, is just to ensure that we mobilize at least resources to ensure that the implementation process is facilitated.
Okay, we'll in fact come back to resources, but let's look at our main issue here. Let's talk about gender mainstreaming. The fact that we're talking about this ministry being now in fact referred to as the Ministry for Gender and Related Issues makes this even more prevalent. And this area here has been underlined in the National Development Plan. Let me just read a small excerpt here that says, the Gender and Women Empowerment Policy 2010-2020, are you in fact aware of this policy?
Yes.
Very well. Provides guidance for the achievement of gender equity and equality in the country, and through its implementation plan sets indicators and a framework to assess sectoral departments, partners, and other stakeholders to mainstream gender underline from a rights-based approach in their planning and programming and implementation processes in order to achieve gender equity and equality as provided or in the Constitution of the Gambia and all the relevant international instruments that the country has ratified. So looking at this particular excerpt, send a message that mainstreaming gender in this country is key and it's indeed a priority. And PS, that makes me want to ask, how far have we come in this endeavor, and who in fact monitors these institutions to make sure that their programs are reflective of this excerpt?
Thank you very much for that question. Mainstreaming gender, look, if you look at the NDP, it has put women empowerment and gender equality as key to socio-economic growth of this country.
Right.
So it's our mandate as a ministry to ensure that gender is mainstream, not only gender, even children. They mainstream in all programs, policies, and projects as far as institutions of this country are concerned. Now, we have seen just 2 days ago, yesterday, the Ministry of Petroleum coming up with gender mainstream, document in the energy sector. And we want to see this replicated with all the institutions, So the mainstreaming is a process. I think some institutions, they don't know how to go about mainstreaming gender.
So who assesses them? Who guides them through in this?
The ministry should. What we did, we identified focal points at the level of all the ministries and departments. And these focal points we work with, we are going to give them capacity, because capacity building is very important so that they can know how to go about mainstreaming gender in their activities as far as their ministries are concerned. And another thing about this mainstreaming, in 2014, myself and my deputy, then I was with the Office of the President at the Policy Analysis Unit, we went on a study tour in Uganda. And the purpose of that study tour was to understudy Uganda when it comes to gender responsive budgeting. Now, what they do in Uganda is that at the level of the Ministry of Finance, they have a score sheet. So each of the ministries, when the budgets are presented for bilaterals, they will go through the budget to see whether at least a certain percentage is mainstream in their budget for gender. If not, your budget would not pass and you have to go and redo your budget, which is a very interesting thing we can also do here in the Gambia, because since women form 51% of the population, and our role is very important when it comes to national development, definitely, and that is why we're given the priority to have a ministry. We should do everything possible to ensure that gender is mainstream.
And DPS, who in fact is monitoring this process as we speak, is there any mechanism already?
I think I'll take you back to the question, what has been stated in the NDP. Basically, we started with engenderizing the NDP. We're looking at all the indicators of agriculture, education, all the sectors. I mean, because we are placed under a very critical area as one of the critical enablers of growth in the country, and it has been reflected in the NDP. So what we did was to engenderize all those indicators to ensure that the consideration of men, women, children, and persons with disability have been taken into place in terms of when you are developing policies, when you're developing programs. We've gone far. When you look at gender mainstreaming in this country, there are institutions that have already qualified.
Okay.
I mean, the Ministry of Education has a unit, a special unit, that we monitor, we work with directly. Just recently, the Ministry of Justice also opened a special unit that is looking at child protection as a unit that we work closely. And then the Ministry of Agriculture is also trying to, come up with such initiatives.
Have you been engaging them?
I mean, they are our key partners in this mainstreaming process, because when you look at the vegetable farmers, 100% are
Ministry
women.
of Trade.
Ministry of Trade also have a she trade program that we collaborate directly. The principle here is when policies are developed, we are invited to review those policies, specific review of those policies to ensure that gender is mainstream. In terms of implementation, we also have this, what the PS has said, the Gender Focal Point Network, that meets quarterly to discuss in terms of progress made in those indicators. How far are we? What are the challenges and the way forward? So there is a mechanism for monitoring.
Well, that is definitely good to know, because it's one step, important to where we're in fact headed, which is gender parity. Let's also take it a little bit further and look at what it says here again. Strengthening the implementation of laws, policies, and strategies. Put a comma to that. Let's come to economic empowerment and sustainable livelihood skills. When we look at the norm, in the country, first of all, I always say that getting data in this country is a problem. And when it comes to issues that women are confronted with, we're still facing the same issue. How do we gauge prevalence? But you look at the country and you realize that we must disrupt. We must break the chain of gender stereotypes and as well discriminatory norms, against women. With this gender ministry, DPS, we're expecting this should be a thing of the past. And so let me just still ask on the question of economic empowerment, because that is one key way we can break the chain.
Absolutely.
That is one key way we can change these stereotypes. What have you done in this domain? Is it with about providing labor-saving devices, equal access to land or credit, credit facilities for women? We just want to know what strategies have you put in place to revert this cycle?
I think, first of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the President for taking the bold step in terms of coming up with the Women Economic Empowerment program, I could say, because we've just recently witnessed the ascending of the WEF, Women Enterprise Fund Act of 2020. I mean, in terms of economic empowerment, previously we've been making significant gains, but of course, as you said, it was not enough, because all the microfinance packages that were provided to women becomes a very big challenge. Because of collateral, they could not be able to reach certain threshold in terms of borrowing, and that makes them very difficult to grow. You find a woman doing some kind of activity for more than 20 years, and the person is at the same place. Why? Because there is no injection in terms of how the person can move from one level to the other. Now, having this initiative, coupled up with the banking environment, will help women to be able to have access to microfinance and be able to, have support base. And of course, the program is not only providing credit. We are also looking at as a means of social protection, as a means of social cohesion, as a means of addressing issues of inequality. We have to look at where we can even give grants to those women to be able to come up with viable businesses. Then we can continue monitoring, because here is very important. We had series of experience in terms of how those economic empowerment packages went through. When you look at SDF, GAUFA, and others, we learn lessons from those ones, and then thank God things have gone the way we expected, and currently we are distributing our forms. People are administering those forms. Associations are coming. But the most important thing is, whenever we give women money, we have to make sure that we follow up to make sure that value for money.
Very well.
Yes.
Because in fact, a woman yourself, I'm sure you've lived with these women. You've traveled to their communities, and you've seen how much this is so important for their economic liberation. Why do you attach so much importance to this?
Now, as Kajali has already mentioned, I think women empowerment is not only economic empowerment. We can empower women in different ways. If you look at the situation of the women in the rural end and the women in the urban areas, they are different. We can say that the women in the rural, the urban end are better off than those in the rural end. So what we do, we try to classify their situations. So if you look at during this COVID-19, we have worked with the Ministry of Trade and purchased the onions from the female onion growers. There we involved the private sector, so the buyer is from the private sector, and he bought all the onions at a very, good price, compared to how much they sell their onions prior to that. And this is something we want to continue. And as we have said, empowering women financially, we have established or put in place the Women Enterprise Fund, which is funded by EU and the government of the Gambia. Government of the Gambia is putting in 6 million for the year, 5 million towards the fund dialysis, and then 1 million towards operations. EU promised with the support they're giving to budget support they're giving to government, that they will put in 3 million to that fund. So this fund we're going to give to women to empower them financially, because they have to be financially independent. Now there was some indicators that were given to us that we had to meet, and then we were able to have the framework, the legal framework. The bill passed. It's now enacted and assented to by the president. And now we set up the regional structures. We have committees at the level of the region, because we believe in decentralization. We don't want everything to stay at the center. And these committees would collect the forms that are filled by these women groups, and we're giving it to groups, not individuals.
So you've started the process?
Yes, we have already started the process, and then right now we have given out the forms. Women groups are filling them, and then we'll do the finalization of the beneficiaries, and then we'll disburse the funds. Inshallah, everything being equal, we want to disburse at least the first group by December.
Interesting. December is already here, and we hope that happens soon.
Amen.
But let's also talk about a very important issue here. You are wearing orange already. 16 days of activism. We're still talking about women issues, gender issues. Tell us what's different about this year's commemoration, and how is the ministry leading the agenda?
Thank you very much. The 16 days of activism is very, very significant for children and women. Now, normally when we talk about women, we talk about children, anyway, because you cannot separate them. They're inseparable. So during this period, we used to celebrate somehow in grand style, sometimes, having a parade from Q-Cell or Afri-Cell to the monument at Westfield, and then we'll have a meeting with, women and men. The children, school children are normally invited, and we'll talk about women issues, violence issues, abuse, neglect. But then this time around, because of COVID-19, we have to downscale, the activities, and then just to respect the protocol for, social distancing, we're using the radios and the TVs to talk to the people, about issues concerning women. That's exactly what we did. That is why on Monday we were here with your women program, talking about the 16 days activism. And the color, the theme is orange, the wall. But we are oranging the Gambia. Anyway, that's why you see me in orange.
I think I have a little bit of that.
Exactly. So we want all men and all, women, everybody in the Gambia to be wearing orange within this period, if you have it.
I think it's interesting, because for me, it's a period where we take stock of the challenges that women continue to face on a daily basis. And gender issues we're talking about, of course, amongst them. Gender-based violence is key in this process, because it's the cornerstone of why we are, in fact, commemorating this. And when you look at issues of rape, sexual offenses, I had to put a comma on the laws when I was talking to you about economic empowerment. Let me go back to that, because we have laws, very good ones, and we've, of course, ratified quite a lot of them. We have the Sexual Offences Act 2013. We have the Women's Amendment Act. I saw here 2012, but of course we have Women's Amendment Act 2015, and which of course criminalizes FGM. And still, when we're having conversations, we're talking about not implementing the law. There's a loophole somewhere. Are we still saying that training is not enough? Are we still saying that people are not aware? I think we've done a lot of awareness already.
Yes, I think people are aware, but we have our social and cultural norms and traditions that is deterring the progress we're making as far as FGM is concerned. And then cross-border issues is also a concern. I mean, we have neighboring countries, and in some areas in the rural end, you will have a compound here in the Gambia, and the next compound is in Senegal. So if a parent takes a child across the border and then do it in Senegal, you cannot hold that person responsible for that act. Even though we've been having
we don't have laws that of course serve in cross-border crimes.
Not yet, but
in this case.
Not yet, but we have signed an MOU with the Ministry of Gender in Senegal and children, so that we can work together and see how we can harmonize our programs and projects together as as neighboring countries. So because of COVID-19, it's definitely delaying the progress we should make with that MOU. But then let me just continue from where I stopped. If you look at FGM, we have it happening. If you look at the rates, I mean, it's really high. But if the cases are not reported, they're very difficult to address. And then the Ministry of Justice too, they have a big role to play. The police, and then we have this Maslaha syndrome. When these things happen, people will not report.
Would you say the police are doing enough in enforcing the laws? Because most of the cases, we understand, die in their domain. What happens is the parents that come and say they don't want the case anymore, or something is wrong somewhere.
You know what? Justice delayed is justice denied. Now, I think we should have a code in place that would basically address all these issues of violence, neglect when it comes to women and children. Unless we have that, the delay sometimes would cause families to sit in their in their homes and then discuss it and say, okay, let's forgive, dogali yalala. Because everything we relate to Allah, which is good, alhamdulillah. But then sometimes we need to take action as a country so that at least the perpetrators, the people taking these wrong actions against women and children would stop doing it. Otherwise, I mean, it will continue and it will be very difficult to control. We have our development partners also really helping to make sure that we achieve, the elimination of FGM in the Gambia. Since we have a law in place, what we all need to do is just to enforce it. And to enforce it, we need Interior, the police, has a big role to play. Ministry of Justice also has a big role to play.
DPS, let me just shift to you. You've mentioned key stakeholders, the police, the Justice Ministry. How are you engaging them in these efforts?
I think the police have been engaged since the beginning of the campaign to end FGM in this country. Basically what we did was to develop a training manual that clearly state what are the nitty-gritties that constitute issues of FGM, child marriage, GBV, that is gender-based violence.
Right.
After having that manual, and then they were trained to be able to, train others that are coming in new. So far, I could say almost 2,500 officers have been trained.
Right.
And then we have
across the country? Or?
Yes, across the country, across the country. And then we are still continue training them. But what is important here is the enforcement of the laws. Right. It's not that people are not reporting. There are cases happening, they are reporting. But of course, as this country is, we are so close to the extent that the Maslaha syndrome has taken us out of the box in terms of prosecution. Because I mean, if those evidence are not available, it becomes very difficult for the police to proceed to prosecute. I mean, you can't prosecute somebody when somebody is not willing to come out to testify before the court.
And I think sometimes it has to do with things that happened in the past, because sometimes they realize that even if they report, the cases wouldn't go further. So they decide to keep quiet.
Absolutely.
And the families will say there's no need for you to go on about it, because at the end of the day, nothing comes out of it.
Because we looked at the law critically when we were amending, and decided the fact that even the person who is a passerby knows that this is happening, has the right to report. But of course, if you have somebody who's reported, a case is already filed, and the person's detail have been taken, and now the case has been taken to the court, and you call the person to come and witness before the magistrate, it becomes a challenge. Big problem. And that's why the Kian case, if you could recall, we had to shy away at the end of the day, because when things started, even the perpetrator disappeared. Exactly. So who are you going to take to court? It's quite very difficult. And most of the time, it is old women will take their granddaughters, and then you can't take your grandmom. it's quite important that we need to talk about this and discuss about it, because there are still Gambians who believe that it is a religious obligation. Yes, they still stick to that. So of course, by looking at, just recently we did a KAP in terms of their knowledge, attitude and practice. A lot of people believe, when you look at the mix, the current mix 2018, has stated that, you know, a lot of people believe that FGMC is very positive to their health. So these are things that we need to decode and try to work on new programs, new approach. Sensitization is not actually working. People know, but they do.
They know.
Yeah.
And
I just wanted to add that too. If you look at our legal frameworks, sometimes they're not talking to each other.
Absolutely.
That is why we're trying to look at all the legal frameworks that we have in relation to women and children and try to amend them. Yes. Wherever we have a discriminatory clause.
In line.
Exactly. That is what we are working with the Ministry of Justice and National Assembly to ensure that the related frameworks are talking to each other.
Good to know that you're doing a lot of paperwork in this regard, but we'll put comma to that and take a short break. When we come back, we take off from where we've just stopped. Do stay. Welcome back to the OGI Hour, and we're here today talking about the Ministry of Women, Children and Social Welfare. Don't forget to keep following us on our handles to get all the updates. And we're here, we have of course the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry, and with her here is the Deputy Permanent Secretary. And DPS, let me just come to you a little bit, because we're going to talk about children now. We've been talking about women, of course, slightly mentioning them in there as well. But we have institutions also, the likes of the Child Protection Alliance, we have the SOS. I don't know, how are you working with these institutions in strengthening the welfare of children? Because we still have cases where children are victims of rape, of abuse. You talk about child labor. We're still yet to see a major breakthrough in this regard.
I think basically we've been having a major breakthrough. It's just like, I mean,
would you say?
Yeah, we were not actually coming to the media to talk about things that we do.
So if they've not been reported, they should be reported.
Yeah, that's actually the case here. I mean, we constituted a child protection steering committee for a long time that deals with child protection matters, which include government institutions and civil society, which is a very strong institution that we established for a long time. I mean, and just recently we tore some of the facilities that, you know, childcare institutions across the country.
Which facilities are?
I mean, the civil society organizations that are running daycares and child protection units and orphanages and so on, yeah. And we put a temporary closure to penny appeal because they've not met certain standards, because we come up with standards, set standards that like standard of operations.
In Penny Appeal UK?
Yeah. Yes, the Penny Appeal UK, well, they have an orphanage in the Gambia. Yeah, and they were shut down. And of course, just recently we've, you know, lifted that shutdown, and they are working on, you know, upgrading the systems that are in place to be able to make the place more child-friendly. There are cases that comes to us, and then we look at them critically, because child protection, in terms of I mean, secrecy, identity, is very important. You don't just take children's cases and across the street, because I mean, we just recently even saw one of the videos that was established by one Gambian, you know, talking to a child that was being chained. You know, you remember on social media, and we had to come up with a press release in terms of protecting, condemning that. Exactly. So we've been doing a lot of things, but the steering committee is very strong, and it has a very strong leadership under the permanent secretary, and we are making some gainways.
Very well. Yeah. That's important to note. But let me just shift to the comments coming now on social media. They're very much an important part of this conversation. And the first one here says, how does inequality, this is from Fatma, how does inequality impact female representation in the Gambia? Yes.
Inequality impact female representation big time in the Gambia. If you look at our setup, whether it's government, whether it's the private sector, they're all male dominated. You have about 7% representation of women in National Assembly. You know, looking at the civil service, looking at the private sector. And then sometimes if you ask the employers, what they will tell you is, you know, if you hire these young girls, especially when they get married, you know, they will go on their maternity leave for, you know, 6 months plus, you know, their annual. Exactly. So when they apply to any job, normally the opportunity is given to the male counterpart, which is a very sad situation, because if you look at the purpose of, you know, the girls or the ladies, you know, staying away for that period of time as a, how do you call it again, confinement leave, is just to ensure that they can breastfeed their kids. And breastfeeding their children has health implications in the future for the country. We don't want to be spending too much on health services, because health services are very expensive. So if we can produce a healthier society, we will all be better off. So I think employers should also start considering this aspect of, you know, the reason, one of the reasons why we are telling, you know, girls to stay, or ladies to stay away for, you know, this confinement leave of 6 to 8 months. If, you know, if it is only left to the ministry, we'll even give them 1 year. But then the underrepresentation is really affecting us, because we form for 51% of the population. So what we're doing is, that is why we're working on empowerment, and we're working on gender equality. We want to ensure that the 30% quota is implemented in the country, in the private sector, in the public sector as well. So this 30% quota is an affirmative action to ensure that women are empowered.
Very well. Key reason why we in fact need to mainstream this agenda.
But then again, the empowerment, we don't want to see the numbers. We want to see quality as well. So in this aspect, capacity building is very important. We don't want the women to hold these positions and they cannot do much. We want them to be able to man the positions that are given to them when it comes to decision making.
Would you say it's just these stereotypes you've mentioned, or is that sometimes they're not qualified? That is why they've not been given these positions?
Yes, if you look at the history of this country, most of these girls, they end up being dropped out at secondary level, because as we have talked about child marriage, you know, at the age of 16, 17, you know, some of the parents would be scared that my child would, you know, just, you know, go into sex affairs and then have kids, and then, you know, and that would be a shame to the family. Then they will just choose a husband for the child. So all these things are affecting, you know, girls' education. And without the education, without the experience, without the academic performance, now it will be very difficult to have them in these positions.
Very well. I think this is a decade of action. This is why we need to start now. 10 years from now, once we start doing this, making sure that these girls are going to school, there's a high probability that once they're married off and they have kids, their kids will go to school as well, whether they are girls or boys. So if your mom is educated, there's a high tendency that you will be educated as well. So we do hope that we can see concrete change in the short term, just the same. But we move on to another question. The second one says, what are some barriers women face within institutions?
Now, I have just highlighted one of them, that is this issue of the confinement leave. But then another issue is the cultural and social norm. Even at the level of the home, if you have a daughter and a son, normally you give preference to the boy, the male child, than the female child. Like, you know, getting up in the morning, having to iron uniforms. You will tell the girl, iron your uniforms. You see? So the boy would just sit there, wait for the girl to iron his. So we grow up with this, you know, belief that men are superior. That's a belief we have. And when your husband talks, you should not talk. You know, when you are in a gathering, when the male talk, the women will say, oh, the men have already spoken, so let's be quiet. And this is something we're trying to break through sensitization, through advocacy. That's why when you talk about sensitization, I said it will never be enough. We have to continue talking, because that's the only way we can effect change, positive change. Interesting.
What about sexual harassment as well that occur, especially in institutions?
Yes, sexual harassment, this is something the ministry is looking into. We have seen the CSOs also, you know, looking at, you know, having a sexual harassment act, because it happens. It happens in different forms. But as, you know, we have a difference from the West. The difference is the social and cultural and traditional norms. Even in the West, if you tap somebody on the back, the buttocks, I'm sorry for the language, is sexual harassment. But here people don't consider that as sexual harassment.
I would consider tapping me at the back as sexual harassment.
Because you are exposed to that environment. Okay. But then, like, if you go to the grassroots level where you have people who have never heard of sexual harassment,
they see it as normal.
They will see it as normal. Unless, you know, you come across maybe somebody who's really dignified, not to want any gentleman to touch her.
So still education.
Exactly. So that is why the sensitization aspect is very important, and then the advocacy. Let's tell them what their rights are. What constitute sexual harassment. It happens in the workplaces too. Sometimes you will have a boss, you know, maybe going after a secretary or you know an employee, and then saying no would means you will lose your job. But sometimes they're scared to address these issues through the right channels, like reporting it to the police or reporting it to their parents. Even reporting it to the parents would help. But then sometimes they would just want to keep it to themselves because they're scared that they will lose the job, and they really need the income.
Very well. Let's also just shift a little bit to another one here that says, is your office researching sexual liberation, sexual assault, domestic violence, and women's oppression? Research is key.
Thank you. Now, in terms of research, now this is very important. That is why you just remember that the ministry is newly established. That is last year. It's about a year, some months old. But we're looking into having a department or a directorate of research, because these are issues that are very relevant. Data is very, very important in all planning aspects. So without the right data, you cannot plan properly. So, and to avoid not planning properly, we're setting up this department of research, and we'll be looking into all these aspects. But then when it comes to gender-based violence, we have the network against gender-based violence, getting information for us. Right now, I have the data.
You've been working with them?
Yes, we work closely with them. I mean, as a ministry, we coordinate and then we collaborate with all stakeholders and all key players as far as women and children are concerned. In front of me, I have the data on, you know, gender-based violence from January to October. Now, the total number up to October this year was 247 cases, and we went on to classify it. Now, for female victims, we have 216, you know, classified based on regions and you know, locations. The female, 216, the male, 31 victims, children, 108 victims, sexual violence, 214, and physical violence, 33.
Interesting. Yes. From January to October.
To October.
10 months.
During the COVID-19. Now, for Native 2, dealing with, you know, trafficking in person, they also have some data with them at that level. So all these things constitute violence against women. Now, on FGM, I think the rate is about 74.7%, if I am right. It's about that. And then we also talk about child marriage, which is also prevalent as far as the girls in this country are under 18. When we talk about child marriage, we're talking about girls under 18. Yeah, so I think it's important for the public to know that.
So when it comes to protection, you've mentioned a very key point when you were answering one of the questions here about the woman being afraid of being sacked, which is one reason why we need mechanisms that protect these women, especially in the workplaces as well. Are you looking forward to initiatives like this in the workplaces and just generally in the country?
Sure, we're definitely looking towards that, because it's, as I said, it's important. I mean, women, girls, children should be protected at all levels. Be it the home, being the workplace, being the school, anywhere they are, they should be protected. Now, having these laws in place would help us at least to enforce them at the level of all these institutions.
Because what happens is, after they report, repercussions start coming in. It's either the perpetrator is further bullying you, harassing you, and then further stigmatizing you into being silent. So once we have these mechanisms that protect them from further victimization, then reporting in fact becomes
easier. Definitely. I totally agree with you. And then for the gender-based violence, recently we have launched the 1313 hotline, where cases can be reported. And then this would help us to have data as well. And it's amazing how many people we have.
They're reporting?
Yes, calling. I mean, calling and reporting cases. To the extent that even Paradise Foundation, who's really looking into that, the hotlines for us, established a center at Canifing for victims of gender-based violence.
Interesting.
And then at the level of the ministry, we're also refurbishing one of the facilities at the the children's shelter in Bakote to use it as psychosocial support center for victims of gender-based violence. And we are looking forward to working with the donors, the donor partners, to have these centers, in the different areas or in the different regions.
Very good. You wanted to say something, DPS?
Yes, I wanted to, emphasize the fact that we've tried to make sure that we promote coming up with sexual harassment policies at workplace. I mean, when you have a law, it's quite important that people use the law to prosecute. But of course, at institutional level, it's only the Ministry of Education that is having a sexual harassment policy in this country.
Only
yes,
the
only
Ministry of
Ministry that I know of.
Yeah.
So we are promoting and encouraging all sectors, I mean, all MDAs, ministries, department, agencies, including civil society organizations, to come up with sexual harassment policy at workplace. We have been saying this for quite a long time. So we decided now to use it as one of our indicators in terms of following up with this.
Let's see how that comes about. Let's just take the last question here, just answer briefly. That Isatu is asking, still on Facebook, where does the economic development of rural women lie? They are the national anthem of development, yet their economic gains are minimal. Most of the time, the local knowledge is not costed, yet it forms a fundamental tool in our development process. She's also asking, what will my auntie say now I am exporting rice from the Gambia because she's been farming her whole life?
May all prayers be answered.
Amen.
Anyway, that is definitely what we are praying for, to work with these women in the regions, especially those in the farming sector, to be able to produce as much as possible so that we will be food self-sufficient in this country, and then go to the extent of being able to export.
And as now we are not food sufficient.
I would not say that, because we are still importing food products from outside.
Okay, the agri-minister validated that.
So, and then to cultivate rights, it's a process. I mean, you need the land, the capacity, to be able to produce as much as you want. And then, but we are working with the Ministry of Agriculture, because as I said, women issues are cross-cutting. So, and since we're dealing with gender now, men included, I mean, we're working with the Ministry of Agriculture, looking into how we can, put these groups, these farmers, into cooperative. Now, into cooperative, and then having storage facilities for them. Because if you look at some of these produce, the products they produce, most of them get spoiled in the process because they don't have any means of preserving these products. Like the tomato growers. Tomatoes, when the season is hot, if you keep it for 2-3 days, they got rotten. And then, you cannot sell it. Or if you sell it at a loss. So that is why the ministry is working together with agriculture and trade to see how we can help the farmers in the Gambia, including men, women, so that at least their produce are priced, the normal price, the market price, and then they get the benefit of their labor.
Very well.
Thank you very much.
Interesting. It's been interesting what we've been discussing here, PS and DPS, but just to wrap it up, you have a whole lot of work to do. Gender, now it's referred to as gender, which means you're looking at women, men, you're looking at children, their welfare as a whole. That means you really need quite a lot of resources to be able to really make this work progressive. Recently, we've been talking about how much has been allocated to the ministry in the budget estimates, and there has been word going around that it's not quite enough. 0.39%, correct me if I'm wrong. Would you say this is in fact enough? And what would you say is enough?
As far as the budget is concerned, it's never enough. And with the budget, looking at our portfolios, women, children, people with disability, the elderly, all other vulnerable groups, being allocated 0.39, less than 0.4% of the budget, the government budget, I think that is really, really, really going to be difficult for the ministry to meet its expectations. So, we have bilaterals with the Ministry of Finance, we had bilaterals with National Assembly, and we have raised our points. I mean, we definitely have to get the resources if we want to get to where we want to be and meet the expectations of these groups. So what we did, we had a consultation meeting with National Assembly, and we have highlighted the need to increase the budget, because under social welfare, we have a budget for welfare of Gambians. Here we assist, the elderly, who are really vulnerable, and give them, a sum of money every month or, every quarter to assist themselves. And then we also have like the convicts. They have families. Now, if you're taken to jail and then you have a family, you know, even if you come out of jail, you still need to make certain ends meet.
Yeah.
So through social welfare, we do that. We, at the level of Women's Bureau, we have contributions to local organizations. We have different, you know, women organizations that do so many activities. So what we do, we from this budget, budget line, we just take some amount, you know, just to assist them so that when they want to engage in any activities, it will be done successfully.
Interesting. I'm also aware of the fact that these welfare officers do go to the prisons to talk to these convicts as well. Exactly. So that also...
Still coming back to the budget. Sometimes the way this budget implementation works, it's kind of critical. And most people, the public, do not know how it works. They just believe that when you say, I budgeted 5,000 for this, you know, activity, you'll just get the 5,000 immediately from the Ministry of Finance. It doesn't work like that.
Okay.
All our budget should be program-based budgeting. But then most of the time we do this itemized budgeting, which doesn't help. So and at the level of our ministry, we did a program-based budgeting because we want to see continuity. We want to ensure sustainability of our programs. So sometimes when you put in a request at the level Ministry of Finance for cash allocation, based on the scarce resources and you know limited resources, they will just allocate what is possible.
Okay.
Yes. And then maybe what is possible for them is not the right amount for you to implement that activity. So sometimes this is what delays government implementation rate when it comes to, you know, implementing their activities as planned in their strategic plans.
Comprehensive enough. DPS, so we've run out of time, but just to sum it up, what would you say enough covers?
I think basically a budget actually reflects on the needs of a ministry. And we've looked at, as Pia said, not only looking at itemized, but of course if you want to make an impact, you have to look at programs, programs that are sustainable. And those programs are linked to the NDP. And that's why we had to struggle to get certain budget lines to be ensure that they are very, very important. For instance, as a new ministry, we need, in terms of building capacity of the new staff that are coming on board. We need infrastructural development in terms of space. We need social protection programs, because all the social protection programs that have been implemented so far have been funded by World Bank and other donor partners. So these are areas that we wanted to table before the National Assembly to see how best they can increase
the budget.
Significantly, we're making some kind of
from the way we're talking, we are hopeful that from all of this, maybe they can see a need to, in fact, change their mind. But DPS, it's been great having you, and PS, of course, just to wrap it up, what would be your final message to the public? We have a lot of issues confronting women, and we definitely need to be assured that we can trust this ministry in handling our affairs.
Thank you. I just want to inform the general public that the doors of the Ministry of Gender, Children and Social Welfare of these countries are always open. If you have any questions, you can walk in. We are on the Fatu's Golden Plaza building, adjacent to IEC. And then we have a website that we are developing, so you can go to the internet, search for our website, our ministry's website, and then you can click in and ask questions. If you have direct questions and you have access to the facility, you can come over and we'll address your issues. Now, for victims of gender-based violence, we have the 1313 hotline. You can call anytime. It's free of charge. You can use any carrier, phone carrier, call, and it's free. Then the 1919 is for children, for child protection. If you have any child that's being neglected, abused sexually or economically, please call the 199 and then the case will be taken up. We also have a case management system at the level of DSW, because we want to ensure that any case that we have in hand, we make sure that we follow it to the end.
Very good.
Yes.
Thank
you very much.
PS, of course, it's been great having you in our studios. Many thanks for passing through, and as well, DPS.
Thank you.
That was the Permanent Secretary and, of course, the Deputy Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Women, Children and the Social Welfare, now referred to as the Ministry of gender, children, and social welfare. So get used to that from now on. But this was all we had time for on the OGI Hour. My name is Fatu Elika Muloshi. Till we come your way again next week with another ministry discussing, of course, relevant issues pertaining to national development. Bye for now and stay tuned to the rest of our programs.